2 years ago, I walked out of a marriage with $7 million, a mansion in Florida, and not one tear on my face. I did not fight. I did not beg. I did not ask a single question about where things went wrong. I picked up that pen, signed every document they put in front of me, and was on a flight to Toronto before that ink was fully dry. Most people hear that and assume I was broken, that I took what I could get and ran. I understand why they think that. It is what I was supposed to do. My name is Florette Gulliver. I am 51 years old. I run a healthcare advisory firm out of Toronto that just closed its largest contract to date. I own a waterfront property in Jacksonville, Florida, that I have never spent a single night in, and it generates more monthly income than most people's annual salary. I wake up every morning in a city that does not know my history and does not need to. 2 years ago, I was Florette Caldwell. 17 years. A Buckhead address. The right charity events. The right dinner parties. The right smile beside a man named Idris, who was always more comfortable being seen than being known. I want to tell you about the day he told me. He sat across from me at our kitchen table, our kitchen, in our house, and he told me his girlfriend was pregnant, with twins. He said her name was Raven. He said he was sorry. He said he did not know how this happened. I sat very still. I let him finish. And when he was done, I asked him one question. I asked whether the twins were identical or fraternal. He stopped, looked at me the way people look when the reaction they prepared for does not arrive. He said, "Fraternal." I nodded. I thanked him for telling me. Then I stood up, rinsed my coffee cup, and went to my home office and closed the door. I already knew why that answer mattered. I did not explain it to him then. I am not going to explain it to you yet, either. 3 days later, his mother called me. Mirette Caldwell, 76 years old, Augusta-born, and the most deliberately gracious woman I have ever met in my life. She asked me to come for coffee. I went. She had documents prepared, a settlement, $7 million. The Jacksonville mansion transferred into my name. Everything structured as generosity, as a mother-in-law honoring a woman she respected, ensuring her future was protected. Her attorney sat to her left. Her posture was perfect. Her warmth was impeccable. I read every page. I asked 2 clarifying questions about the transfer timeline. Then I signed. 48 hours. That is all it took. People assumed I signed because I had no choice, because I was devastated and desperate and grateful for anything offered. I have let them think that. It was easier. The truth is, I had been ready to leave that marriage for 3 years before Raven ever existed. The offer did not save me. It simply answered the last logistical question I had been sitting with. There was a moment, not the day Idris confessed, but years before that, when I understood clearly that the marriage was not going to become what I had believed it would. I did not cry about it. I did not confront anyone. I just understood it the way you understand weather. You do not argue with it. You prepare for it. If you are watching this tonight, stay with me. Because this story is not what it looks like from the outside. Drop the time in the comments. I want to know what hour found you here. While I was building my new life in Toronto, something was happening back in Atlanta that nobody thought to tell me about. Until Odette called. The first thing Toronto gave me was cold. Not the kind that asks permission. The kind that meets you at the door of the jetway and walks straight through your coat. I stood outside Pearson Airport with 2 suitcases, a carry-on, and a banker's envelope with account transfer confirmations I had read so many times the fold lines were soft. No one was waiting for me. I had not asked anyone to be. That was not sadness. That was the first clean breath I had taken in years. The Yorkville condo was already leased. I had handled that remotely before I signed the divorce papers, because I do not move without a destination. Furnished, quiet, high floor. I stood at the window the first night and looked at a city that had absolutely no opinion about me. No history. No expectations. No performance required. The first 6 weeks were not glamorous. They were transactional and necessary. And I moved through them the way I move through everything, one item at a time. Canadian accounts opened. U.S. assets repositioned. The settlement funds structured across 3 instruments my financial advisor and I had mapped before I ever boarded that flight. People romanticize starting over. There is nothing romantic about it. There is paperwork and decisions and more paperwork. And then one morning you realize the infrastructure is solid and you can breathe without calculating the cost. Before I set up the firm, I drove to Jacksonville. I needed to see the mansion with my own eyes before I decided what to do with it. Mirette had decorated it the way she decorated everything, with the taste of a woman who needed every room to announce her. Heavy drapes, formal furniture, art chosen to impress rather than to comfort. I walked through slowly. 5 bedrooms, 3 acres, a private dock at the back where the water sat completely still in the November afternoon. I did not feel grateful standing in those rooms. I felt something sharper than gratitude. I felt clarity. A symbol sits, an asset works. I listed it as a luxury executive rental within 60 days. By month 4, it was generating between $18,000 and $24,000 monthly. I have not spent a single night there since. Back in Toronto, Gulliver Health Advisory was incorporated in Ontario in month 4. 1 desk, 2 clients. A reputation I was building from nothing in a country that had not heard my name before. The first contract was small, an operational review for a mid-size clinic group outside the city. I delivered it 2 weeks ahead of schedule. That is how you build in a new place. You do not announce yourself. You perform, and you let the performance speak. Odette called on a Tuesday evening in month 5. "Just checking in," she said. Her voice was warm and careful the way it gets when she is deciding how much to tell me. She mentioned, almost at the end, almost as an afterthought, that wedding planning had started in Atlanta. Then she paused. Not long. Just long enough for me to notice. When I asked what it was, she said it was probably nothing. A vendor dispute, maybe. One of those small planning issues that happen around expensive weddings. The explanation arrived too quickly. I let it pass. I waited for something to move inside me. Grief, anger, even mild irritation. Nothing came. Not numbness. I know what numbness feels like. This was genuine indifference. And I remember sitting with that for a moment because I could not identify exactly when it had arrived. A week after that call, a piece of mail came forwarded from the Atlanta address, handwritten envelope. I recognized the penmanship before I turned it over. I set it on the counter. I finished my coffee first. It was 3 sentences from Mirette, welcoming me to my new chapter, wishing me well. The warmth was impeccable. The handwriting was controlled. I read it once, then read it again. Then I found a folder, labeled it with that day's date, and placed the note inside. I have kept every piece of paper Mirette Caldwell has ever given me. Every single one. That folder is still on my shelf. I have not told you yet why it matters. Mirette Caldwell never raised her voice in her life. She never needed to. She was the kind of woman who could end a conversation with a compliment and leave you standing there trying to figure out exactly what had just happened to you. 76 years old, Augusta born, 50 years of building the Caldwell name into something Atlanta recognized and respected. She wore that history the way some women wear jewelry, not for beauty, but for weight. In 17 years, She was never cruel to me. Not once. She was something more precise than cruel. She was selective. There were rooms in the Caldwell world I was welcomed into, and rooms where the welcome never quite arrived. Family portraits where the framing felt slightly off. Introductions at events where my name was said correctly, but my connection to the family was described in ways that kept me slightly outside it. Compliments that landed 1 inch to the left of where a genuine compliment lands. You could not confront any of it directly. That was the architecture. Every slight was deniable. Every exclusion had an innocent explanation. You either learned to read the language, or you spent 17 years thinking you were imagining things. I learned to read it early. I simply did not show her that I had. At the divorce meeting, she was composed in the way a prepared woman is composed. The documents were organized. The attorney was positioned correctly. The mansion paperwork was on top. She spoke about my future with what sounded like genuine warmth, how she wanted me protected, how she had always admired my strength, how this was her way of honoring what I had given the family. Near the end of the meeting, she paused while discussing the transfer timeline. Not a dramatic pause. Just long enough that her attorney glanced toward her before she continued. A few minutes later, she returned to the same point and explained it again from a slightly different angle, as though she was making certain I understood. It struck me as unusual. Mirette was not a woman who repeated herself unnecessarily. I filed it away. I file everything. Odette called 8 months into my Toronto life. Not her checking-in voice. Her careful voice. She had heard something through the Atlanta circles she moves through quietly. Social workers know everybody, and everybody talks to them eventually. Mirette had known about the affair before the pregnancy. Not a few weeks before, months before. Odette believed possibly more than a year before Idris ever sat across from me at that kitchen table and said Raven's name out loud. I did not speak for a moment after Odette told me that. Then I said, I'm not surprised, because I was not. I was something else entirely. I was recalibrating. There was a dinner party in year 15. Mirette had organized it. Afterward, in the kitchen, she touched my arm and told me I had been wonderful that evening. The way she said, wonderful. I had registered it then and set it aside because I could not name what was wrong with it. Sitting in my Toronto kitchen with Odette's words still in the air, I could finally name it. It was the warmth of a woman who already knew something you did not. The warmth of resolved guilt. The $7 million and the mansion were not generosity. They were not guilt money either. Guilt money is reactive. This was calculated, structured, prepared in advance of a situation that had been in motion long before I was told anything. I did not know the full shape of it yet, but I knew enough. Mirette had not written that check out of love or sorrow. She had written it because something had already been set in motion, and she needed me gone before I could see clearly enough to ask the right questions. Before Odette hung up, she said there was something else. Something she was still trying to confirm. Something about how Raven came to be in our world in the first place. She would call me back when she knew more. It was a Tuesday in year 14. Chicken I had cooked sitting covered on the stove. Idris working late, which by year 14 meant something specific that I had not yet allowed myself to name. The house was the kind of quiet that has weight to it. I sat down at the kitchen desk to pay a bill and opened the wrong account by mistake. The number did not make sense, not because it was large, because it was structured, regular transfers, consistent amounts, a pattern that had nothing accidental about it. I sat with that screen for 4 minutes without moving. Then I closed the laptop, served myself dinner, and ate alone at the table we had picked out together 12 years before. I did not confront him that night. I did not confront him ever. What I did was quieter and considerably more permanent. I spent the next 3 years repositioning everything I could legally move without triggering suspicion. My own income directed into accounts he had no visibility into. Investments restructured. A financial advisor in Decatur I met with on lunch breaks and never mentioned at home. I was a healthcare executive. I understood how systems worked and how quietly they could be redirected when someone patient was operating them. I performed that marriage for 3 more years without missing a mark. Dinner parties, charity events, the right smile beside the right man in the right rooms. Idris never noticed a change because Idris was not watching me closely enough to notice. That was always his fundamental failure. He confused a well-managed household with a contented wife and never examined the difference. He was not a cruel man. I want to be precise about that. He was a man who had been admired his entire life and had mistaken admiration for love so completely that he never learned what genuine attention to another person actually required. Loving Idris meant loving your own reflection in his satisfaction. The moment you stopped providing that reflection clearly enough, you became furniture, present, necessary, unexamined. By year 15, I had stopped being hurt by him. You cannot be hurt by weather. Odette sent a photograph 3 days after our call. No message with it, just the image. A Caldwell family gathering. I recognized the venue, a private event space in Buckhead that Mirette favored. The gathering was from 2 years before Idris ever said Raven's name to me. I looked at the photograph for a long time. In the foreground, the usual Atlanta faces, the right people arranged correctly, but in the background, slightly left of center, stood Mirette, and a woman I recognized the moment I found her. Raven. Younger than I would later know her, but unmistakable. That particular way she positioned herself in a room, always angled toward the most useful person present. They were not being introduced. That was the detail that mattered. When 2 people are being introduced, their bodies carry a specific uncertainty, a slight lean forward, a recalibration of proximity. These 2 women had none of that. They were standing in the easy, shoulder-dropped posture of people who already knew each other well. Mirette's hand was on Raven's forearm, not a greeting touch, a familiar one. This photograph was taken 2 years before the networking event where Idris supposedly met Raven for the first time. I added it to the folder, dated the same day it arrived. Then I sat with what I now knew and what I still did not know. The photograph told me the relationship between Mirette and Raven was older than anyone had suggested. It did not tell me how it began. It did not tell me what had been agreed between them or who had initiated it. A photograph shows you what happened. It does not show you why. I needed more than a photograph for that. Let me tell you about Raven, not with anger. I moved past anger a long time ago. I am going to describe her the way I would describe a calculated risk that materialized, with precision, and a certain cold respect for the architecture of it. Raven came from Memphis originally, relocated to Atlanta 5 years before any of this became visible to me. She worked in event planning and luxury brand promotion, industries that gave her proximity to wealthy circles without membership in them. She was 31 years old, presentable in the specific way that reads as effortless but requires considerable maintenance, and she understood one thing with exceptional clarity: that access is its own form of currency when you know how to spend it. I met her once, before I knew who she was. The Caldwell family gathering, the same event in Odette's photograph. I was moving through the room the way you move through rooms you have attended 50 times, greeting the right people, staying long enough in each conversation, never showing the fatigue of performance. I noticed Raven because she moved differently. She was not working the room the way guests work rooms. She was navigating it. There is a distinction. A guest moves toward comfort. Raven moved toward utility, always angling toward whoever held the most relevant position. adjusting her energy to match what each person needed to see. I noticed it. I filed it. I did not yet have a reason to open that file. Her plan, as I eventually pieced it together, was not complicated. It was disciplined. When Idris sat across from me and told me the pregnancy involved fraternal twins, something registered immediately. Not certainty, not proof, just a question. 20 years in healthcare administration had taught me that situations people describe as simple are often considerably more complex underneath the surface. I remember thinking at the time that the legal and financial implications of that pregnancy were going to be far larger than anyone in the Caldwell family seemed to understand. What I learned later, through documents, timelines, and evidence that had not yet reached me when Idris first confessed, was that the situation was never simply about romance. At the time, I did not know exactly what Raven wanted. I only knew that every piece of information arriving from Atlanta pointed in the same direction. The pregnancy appeared to be creating leverage inside, a family with generational assets, and Raven seemed determined to secure a permanent position before anything shifted. As more evidence reached me, the picture became clearer. What she needed from Mirette was introduction and legitimacy. What Mirette appeared to need from her was result. Two women involved in an arrangement they each believed they were controlling. Neither one trusted the other. Neither one admitted that. Looking back now, Raven's calculation was thorough. She had mapped Idris's vanity, his need for admiration, his particular vulnerability to a woman who made him feel chosen rather than managed. Later documents would convince me that she understood the Caldwell estate structure far better than she ever claimed. She had prepared for Mirette's involvement, for the divorce, and for the legal timeline. She had not planned for me, not the version of me that existed by the time she entered that marriage. She had planned for a grieving wife, a displaced woman, someone whose attention would be entirely consumed by loss. She did not plan for a woman who had spent 3 years quietly repositioning her finances, who signed those papers in 48 hours, not from shock, but from readiness, and who was already operating a firm in another country before Raven had selected a wedding venue. That was her only miscalculation. But in a plan with no margin for error, one miscalculation is enough. My phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. Atlanta area code. Not Odette's number. I answered. The voice was quiet, careful. A woman who chose each word before she released it. She told me she had worked in the Caldwell household for 11 years. She told me she had been watching things for a long time. She said she needed me to know I was not the only one who saw clearly, and that when she was ready, she would have something for me. I thanked her. I asked no questions. I told her I would be here. After I hung up, I sat with the call for a long moment. The Atlanta world was beginning to crack. Not loudly, the way foundations crack, quietly, from underneath, long before anyone standing on the surface feels anything at all. I want to tell you what I built. Not as a list of accomplishments, as evidence. Gulliver Health Advisory's first major contract came 14 months after I incorporated. A hospital system in Ontario, 4 facilities, aging operational infrastructure, a board that had been told for 2 years that efficiency improvements were coming and had seen nothing materialize. They needed someone who could walk into a system, read it without sentiment, and tell them exactly where it was bleeding. I had spent 20 years doing precisely that inside other people's organizations. The difference now was that I was doing it for myself. I won the contract by being the most prepared person in the room, not the loudest, not the most polished. I had studied their published financials, their patient flow data, their staffing ratios across all 4 facilities before I walked into that presentation. When their CFO asked me a question designed to test whether I actually understood their specific situation or was delivering a generic pitch, I answered with a number from their own third-quarter report that their internal team had apparently not flagged. The room shifted. That is the only moment in a pitch that matters. The moment the room shifts. I delivered the engagement 8 days ahead of schedule. The referral that followed came within 6 weeks. By month 22 in Toronto, Gulliver Health Advisory had 4 ongoing client relationships, a small team of 3 operating out of our financial district office, and a reputation in Canadian healthcare administration circles that I had built entirely on performance. Nobody in that world knew me as anyone's ex-wife. I was simply Florette Gulliver, and Florette Gulliver delivered. The Florida mansion was performing better than my most optimistic projection. The pharmaceutical executive rental had extended twice. Between that and 2 shorter bookings, the property had generated just under $240,000 in its second year. The asset Mirette signed over as a calculated gesture had become one of the most productive decisions of my financial life. I do not think that is what she intended. I have found that outcomes rarely match what Mirette intends. My Toronto days had a rhythm that belonged entirely to me. Early mornings, good coffee, the walk to the office along streets that asked nothing of my history. I had learned the neighborhood the way you learn a new language, imperfectly at first, then fluently, then without thinking about it at all. In the second month of my second year, I accepted a consultation request from an architectural firm working on a hospital expansion project outside the city. Standard engagement. I prepared the same way I prepare for everything, thoroughly, without assumptions. The lead architect across the boardroom table was named Langston Hughes. He was 53 years old. He asked the right questions, not to perform thoroughness, but because he actually needed the answers to do his work correctly. He did not fill silences unnecessarily. When he disagreed with a projection I had presented, he said so directly and explained why, without making the disagreement about anything other than the work. At the end of the meeting, we exchanged cards. That was all. I went home, made dinner, reviewed 2 contracts, did not think about him. I corrected myself later, standing at the stove, waiting for the water to boil for tea. I had thought about him once. Briefly. The way you notice a building that is well constructed, not with feeling, just with recognition that someone did the work correctly. I put the thought away and went to bed. My phone rang at 11 that night. Odette. I knew before I answered that this was not a social call. I know Odette's voices the way you know weather, by what it does to the air before it arrives. She only uses that particular voice for 2 kinds of news. Neither kind is small. Odette talked for 22 minutes that night. I let her. The wedding planning had become a public problem in the way that Atlanta problems become public. Not through announcements, but through the social circuit's particular silence. The kind where people stop mentioning something in front of certain people because the mention itself has become loaded. Odette moved through those circles the way she always had, quietly, professionally, present enough to hear everything without being positioned as someone who was listening. The venue deposit had been disputed. Raven had selected a property in Buckhead that required a significant non-refundable commitment up front. Idris had paid it. Then Raven had gone back with a revised guest list that nearly doubled the catering requirement, a different florist, and a request to move the date by 6 weeks. The venue had terms. Idris was absorbing costs he had not projected. Odette said people who knew him well said he looked like a man who had confused a transaction for a relationship and was only now reading the receipt. I listened to all of it without satisfaction. I want to be clear about that. I was not glad he was struggling. I was simply noting the information the way you note a weather pattern, not because you caused it, but because understanding it helps you prepare. Raven's financial demands had not softened after the pregnancy or the divorce. If anything, they had sharpened. She wanted things named, secured, and documented before the wedding. Accounts, property rights, the twins listed formally in estate paperwork. Idris was performing the role of a man unbothered by these requests. Odette said nobody in their circle believed the performance. I thanked her, set the phone down, and opened my laptop to clear some emails before bed. There was one from Langston, sent that afternoon. Subject line referencing a follow-up question about the hospital expansion data I had presented. The question itself was straightforward, but the last line read, and I am quoting precisely, that he had found our session the most productive consultation he had attended in recent memory and hoped the feeling was mutual. I read that last line twice. Then I replied. I answered his question, confirmed that the feeling was mutual, and closed the email. I sent it within the hour. I noted, without drama, that I do not typically respond to professional correspondence the same evening it arrives. The Florida mansion had just secured its strongest booking of the year, a 2-month placement from a pharmaceutical company relocating a senior executive from their U.S. headquarters, confirmed at $22,000 per month. The asset continued to perform without my presence or intervention. I appreciated that quality in things. My phone showed a missed call I had not noticed during Odette's call. Mirette. No text, just the call. She had left a voicemail. I waited until I had finished my tea before I played it. Her voice was composed, asking how I was settling in, hoping Toronto was treating me well. All of it phrased with the impeccable warmth she had always deployed like a tool. But there was a pause midway through her second sentence that had not been there before. A half beat, where the next word seemed to require retrieval rather than flow, and the warmth itself, it was different. Less constructed. Looser around the edges in a way I could not immediately categorize. I played the message twice. I did not call back. I set the phone down and noted quietly that Mirette sounded smaller than she used to. I did not name what I thought I was hearing. I simply filed it. Odette called again just before midnight. Short call. The estate attorney handling the Caldwell family documentation had required DNA verification for the twins before any formal additions to the estate records. Results were pending. I told the audience what I already knew they would say. The question was never the result. The question was what Atlanta would look like when everyone else found out. The document arrived on a Tuesday morning. Odette forwarded it without commentary. Just a file attachment and a single line. She said it was time. I made coffee first. Then I sat down at my kitchen table with the Toronto morning coming through the window, and I read it slowly. The way you read something you already half know is coming, but need to see confirmed in print before you allow yourself to act on it. It was a guest list, a networking event held 5 years ago at a private venue in Midtown Atlanta. The kind of event that existed at the intersection of real estate development and civic philanthropy. The specific social territory Idris had always navigated for professional positioning. Mirette Caldwell's name was on the host committee. I read that twice, not because it surprised me, because I needed the confirmation to sit in my body before I continued. I scrolled down to the invitee list, 214 names. I found hers 11 lines from the bottom. Raven, not a +1. Not a general admission registrant, a named, specifically invited guest with a listed affiliation, a luxury events consultancy that I had never heard mentioned in connection with any Caldwell family business. Someone had submitted that name for that list. Someone had decided she belonged in that room. Attached to the guest list was a planning memorandum circulated among the host committee before invitations were finalized. Most of it was routine: seating arrangements, sponsorship confirmations, attendance projections. Near the middle was a short notation beside Raven's name. Host. Recommendation, M. Caldwell. No explanation, no justification. Just 2 words and an initial. The kind of detail nobody notices until years later when it becomes the most important line on the page. The woman from the Caldwell household had been ready. She had sent the document through Odette rather than directly. Careful, considered, the behavior of someone who understood exactly what she was releasing and wanted a layer of distance between herself and the release. I respected that. I did not push for more than she was prepared to give. She had already given enough. The photograph Odette sent showed me familiarity. 2 women with the body language of people who already knew each other, at a gathering 2 years before the networking event. This document showed me something different. Familiarity is personal. Placement is intentional. These are not the same thing. The memorandum did not prove every conclusion I might eventually reach. It did not, by itself, explain motives or agreements. What it did prove was that Mirette had personally recommended Raven for inclusion at an event where Idris was present. Combined with the photograph, it moved the situation out of coincidence and into something that demanded closer examination. Mirette did not simply know Raven before Idris met her. The documentation showed that she helped place Raven in a room where their paths could cross. Whether that was networking, strategy, or something larger, I did not yet know. But whatever existed between those 2 women was already in motion before that event took place. I closed the document. I sat for a moment with the full weight of what I now held. Then I added it to the folder. 2 documented pieces. The photograph establishing prior relationship. The guest list establishing deliberate placement. I have been a healthcare administrator for 20 years. I have sat in rooms where the difference between what people say happened and what the paper shows happened determined outcomes that changed lives. I know exactly what you do with documentation. You file it, you date it, you wait, and you use it precisely when the moment is right. Not before, not in anger, not as a threat. As a fact. That evening, Langston and I had dinner for the first time. A restaurant in Yorkville, small and well-considered. The kind of place chosen by someone who had actually thought about it rather than defaulted to impressive. We talked for 3 hours. He did not perform ease. He simply had it. At some point, I mentioned I was divorced. He said he knew. Professional circles in Toronto talked, he said, and he had heard my name before our boardroom meeting. He did not ask what happened. He moved the conversation forward in a direction that told me he was interested in who I was now, not in the archaeology of how I got here. I noted that distinction carefully. I drove home with the windows down, despite the October cold. Odette texted just before 11. The Caldwell estate attorney had issued a formal timeline for the DNA documentation. Results were expected within 3 weeks. Atlanta, she said, was holding its breath. I already knew what those results would confirm. What I was waiting to see was what Atlanta would do with the truth once it had nowhere left to hide. 3 months after that first dinner, 7 meetings total. I know that number precisely because I am precise about everything. Not because I have been counting the way a woman waiting counts, but because I catalog what matters, and this had begun to matter. We had fallen into a rhythm that felt less like courtship and more like 2 people who had both built things from difficult material and recognized that quality in each other without needing to announce it. Tuesday evenings mostly, occasionally a Saturday afternoon. A gallery opening he mentioned, and I attended without overthinking it. A walk along the waterfront after a meeting that ran late, and neither of us moved to end. Nothing rushed, nothing performed, just 2 adults choosing each other's company with the quiet deliberateness of people who had learned the cost of choosing poorly. About 6 weeks in, I told him about Atlanta. Not everything. I gave him the shape of it. 17 years. A marriage that had hollowed out long before it ended. A departure that looked to the outside world like a woman escaping, and was in fact a woman arriving. I told him about the settlement without the figures. I told him I had rebuilt without telling him everything I had rebuilt from. He listened without filling the silences. That is rarer than people acknowledge. Most people hear a difficult story and reach immediately for reassurance, for something to place between themselves and the discomfort of witnessing. Langston simply listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said one sentence. I have thought about that sentence more than once since that evening. I am not going to tell you what it was yet. I will tell you that it did not contain a single word of pity. Odette called on a Wednesday morning while I was reviewing a client deliverable. Her voice told me before she said anything that this was not a checking-in call. The DNA results had arrived in Atlanta. The estate attorney had delivered them to Idris privately. Protocol, apparently, given his position as the named party in the documentation request. Raven had not yet been informed. Idris had received that envelope, read what was inside it, and had not spoken a meaningful word to anyone since. Odette had this from 2 separate sources. She said he had canceled 3 meetings and that his housekeeper, referenced only as the woman who had worked for him since before the marriage, said he had sat in his study until past midnight the previous night with the lights low. I did not need Odette to tell me what the results said. I had known since the morning Idris sat across from me and told me the twins were fraternal. I had known the way you know something when the pieces arrange themselves into a shape that only has one explanation. I did not feel satisfied imagining him in that study. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was the particular exhausted pity you feel for someone who built their own trap with considerable effort across many years and then seemed genuinely surprised to find themselves in it. Idris was not a stupid man. He was a man who had never once believed the consequences would reach him personally. I finished the deliverable. I sent it. I made lunch. At 4:17 that afternoon, my phone showed a name I had not seen on an incoming call in 2 years. Idris. I looked at it for the full duration of the first ring. Then I turned the phone face down and went back to the proposal I was drafting. He called again at 6, again just before 9. I did not answer any of them. I finished the proposal, made tea, and went to bed. Whatever he needed to say had waited 17 years to become urgent. It could wait a little longer. I want to step back from my own story for a moment. I can tell you what happened in Atlanta now because I have the full picture. I did not have it while it was happening. I had Odette's calls, fragments arriving in sequence, pieces I was assembling from a city away. But I have it now. And I want you to see it the way I eventually saw it, all at once, clearly, without the fog of proximity that prevented everyone inside it from seeing anything clearly at all. The DNA results confirmed what I had suspected since that kitchen table conversation 2 years prior. Idris Caldwell was not the biological father of either twin. The estate attorney later explained how the discovery unfolded. Because the twins were expected to be included in future estate documentation, formal paternity verification had been required before any records could be updated. The initial testing produced results that did not support Idris's paternity. Additional analysis was ordered because the laboratory identified genetic markers that raised further questions. That second round of testing revealed what nobody involved had expected. The twins were fraternal, And the documentation process uncovered an extremely rare but medically documented circumstance involving two different biological fathers. Rare does not mean impossible. It simply means most people never expect to encounter it until it lands in their own lives. The results were delivered. The wedding was suspended within 48 hours. Not canceled, suspended. Which in Atlanta social language is the difference between an ending and a humiliation that has not yet decided what shape to take. Raven did not break. I had not expected her to. Within 2 days, her attorney had sent formal correspondence to the Caldwell estate. Not an apology, not an explanation, but a legal positioning document that established her intention to pursue support claims based on the period of the relationship, regardless of paternity outcome. She was not a woman who dissolved under pressure. She was a woman who recalculated under pressure. I had always understood that about her. She simply recalculated without the asset base she had planned on, which changed everything about what her calculation could produce. The Caldwell social circle did what Atlanta social circles do when one of their own suffers a visible collapse. They created distance with exquisite politeness, invitations that did not arrive, conversations that ended at a certain depth. People who had attended every Caldwell event for 20 years suddenly discovering scheduling conflicts. Nobody said anything directly. Nobody needed to. That world communicated entirely in what it withheld. Idris was standing in the middle of all of it without the architecture he had relied on his entire life. The marriage was 2 years gone. The children were not his. The woman he had chosen was repositioning legally rather than standing beside him. And his mother, the person who had always been the structural center of the Caldwell world, was no longer fully herself. I can tell you plainly now what I had begun to hear in that voicemail 7 months prior. Mirette's health had been declining for over a year before Atlanta fell apart. Vascular dementia, managed privately, contained within the household with the particular discipline of a woman who had spent 50 years controlling what the outside world was permitted to know about the Caldwells. The household staff knew. A small number of attorneys and physicians knew. Nobody else was told. The woman who had engineered everything, the introduction, the arrangement, the settlement, the entire architecture of what was done, was watching it collapse with a mind that could no longer fully track what it had built. I do not celebrate that. I describe it as the specific cruelty of consequence arriving at the wrong time. She had earned the weight of what she had done. She deserved to carry it consciously. That she could not do so fully was not justice. It was just what happened. Idris was left holding all of it. I describe this to myself without cruelty and without comfort. He had made his choices across 17 years with full capacity and full awareness. The consequences were his in the same measure. Not one person in that entire collapse considered my role in any of it. I had been gone 2 years. I was invisible to that world. They had paid me to leave and assumed that payment had also purchased my irrelevance. Invisible is a very useful thing to be. Odette called on a Thursday morning. Idris had booked a flight to Toronto. She had it from inside the Caldwell household. He was arriving in 4 days. I had 4 days to decide how I wanted to receive him. The morning Idris arrived, I was at my desk by 7:45. I knew his flight time. Odette had sent it without commentary, just the airline, the departure city, the arrival time. I read it, set my phone down, and opened the proposal I had been refining since the previous evening. I held 2 client meetings before noon. I reviewed a contract over lunch at my desk. I answered 17 emails. I did not check my phone for his name. I was not hiding. I was living my day. There is a difference, and I had learned to live inside that difference completely. He arrived at my building at 4:53. The front desk called up the way they always do. I told them to send him. I closed the document I was working on, went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Not for ceremony. Because I wanted something to do with my hands that was not about him. When I opened the door, he was standing with the particular posture of a man working very hard to appear as though he was not working hard at all. 2 years had done something to him that I had not expected. Not age exactly, but subtraction. Like a building that has had its internal supports quietly removed and has not yet fallen, but has begun, slightly, to lean. I looked at him. I stepped back to let him in. He had the address because Mirette's records carried it from the forwarding paperwork I had filed at the time of the move. I had never updated it. A woman with nothing to hide and everything documented is a woman who can afford to be found. I had always known he would come eventually. I had simply waited to see how long it took the collapse to make him move. He sat on my sofa and talked about a Toronto development project for 12 minutes. A mixed-use property in the East End he said he was evaluating for potential investment. He used specific language. He had clearly prepared it. I let him finish. Then I said, quietly, that he could say what he actually came to say. The prepared language left him immediately. What remained was just Idris. And without the performance, there was considerably less there than there used to be. He apologized. He explained. He repositioned the explanation as context rather than excuse, and then caught himself and apologized for that too. I listened without interrupting. I did not perform softness, and I did not perform hardness. I simply received what he was saying with my full attention and gave nothing back. He mentioned the DNA results midway through. He said it carefully. The way you say something you believe will land as a revelation. My face gave him nothing. I already knew. I had known for 2 years. He searched my expression for surprise and found only patience, and I watched him understand, slowly, that my composure was not shock. It was information. He told me Mirette was not well. I said I was sorry to hear it. He told me the estate situation was complicated. I said I understood. He started a sentence about himself, about where he was, what he was facing, and he did not finish it. He stopped in the middle and looked at his hands. I finished it in my own mind. He was alone, completely, structurally, finally alone. He stood to leave. At the door, he turned and asked me one question. He asked whether I had ever, at any point in the 17 years, been happy. I told him I would need to think about that. I closed the door. I called Langston. I made dinner. That question deserved a real answer, not the answer of a woman caught off guard at her own front door. It would need to wait until I had decided what the truth actually was and what I was willing to do with it. I have been holding something back, not from dishonesty, from timing. There is a difference between withholding and waiting, and I have spent enough of my life learning that difference to know which one I was doing. The timing is right now, so I am going to tell you everything. 3 days after Idris left my condo, Odette called with a document package. The woman from the Caldwell household, the one who had called me in that first year, the one who sent the guest list through Odette rather than directly, was ready. She had been ready for some time. She had simply been waiting for the Atlanta situation to reach a point where what she released could no longer be recontained by anyone still standing in that house. The package contained written communications, 11 documents total, emails and 2 handwritten notes exchanged between Mirette Caldwell and Raven, beginning 8 months before the networking event, where Idris supposedly met Raven for the first time. The source was almost absurdly simple. Mirette had kept records. According to the woman from the household, Mirette printed important correspondence routinely: contracts, financial discussions, foundation matters. Personal communications she considered significant. After her health began declining, portions of those files had been reorganized during routine household and care management reviews. The woman had encountered documents that made no sense in isolation until the Atlanta situation began unraveling. Once she understood what she was looking at, she copied only the communications directly connected to Raven and sent them through Odette. I read them at my kitchen table over the course of 2 hours. I did not rush. I read each one completely before moving to the next. The first 3 established contact. Mirette had reached out to Raven through a mutual connection in the Atlanta events industry. Not a friend, a professional intermediary who almost certainly did not know the full nature of what they were facilitating. The tone was formal initially, businesslike, a woman evaluating a resource. By the 4th document, the tone had shifted. Mirette was coaching. She was specific about Idris, his vanity, his particular responsiveness to a certain quality of attention, the social contexts in which he was most susceptible to flattery. She wrote about her own son the way a strategist writes about a variable, without sentiment, with complete accuracy. And there, buried inside the 5th communication, was the first indication of motive. Mirette did not believe the Caldwell family line would continue through me. The language was indirect, as all of her language was, but unmistakable. She referred to legacy planning, to grandchildren, to continuity, to ensuring that family assets remained attached to a future generation carrying the Caldwell name. She never said she disliked me. She never said she wanted me removed. Mirette was too disciplined for language that obvious. But by the 5th document, it was clear she had reached a conclusion years earlier. The marriage had produced no children. Idris was approaching 50, and she intended to solve what she viewed as a family problem before time solved it for her. The financial arrangement was documented in the 7th communication. Contingent on the Caldwell marriage ending in divorce within 18 months of Raven's introduction to Idris, a specific sum would be transferred to an account Mirette had apparently helped establish. The arrangement had a timeline. It had conditions. It had Mirette's language all over it, precise, deniable if read by the wrong eyes, and absolutely clear to anyone who understood how she communicated. I sat with that for a long time. The $7 million and the mansion were not generosity. They were not guilt. They were settlement of a debt Mirette had created because the arrangement she engineered had detonated in every direction except the one she intended. And Florette Gulliver was the documented collateral damage of a scheme Mirette had constructed, funded, and directed. She owed me. She paid me. In her own way, on her own terms, without ever once saying directly what she was actually doing. That was the only way Mirette Caldwell had ever done anything in her life. Langston came over that evening. I told him more than I had told him before. Not everything. I did not need to hand him the full weight of it at once. But enough. He sat across from me at my kitchen table and listened to the shape of what had been done. When I finished, he did not offer solutions. He did not reassemble the story into something more manageable. He just stayed. We sat in my kitchen until past 11, and he did not once make me feel that what I was carrying was too much to be near. Mirette called that night. I answered. The conversation was 4 minutes. She asked about Toronto. I said it was well. She asked about the firm. I said it was growing. Her voice had the looseness I had first heard in the voicemail, the slight retrieval delay, the warmth that no longer sounded manufactured because it no longer had the precision to be manufactured. She did not know what I had spent 2 hours reading. I did not tell her. I said goodnight. I hung up. The next morning, I made 2 calls, one to my attorney, one to my financial advisor. Then I waited. There is a specific satisfaction that comes from paperwork done correctly, not the satisfaction of confrontation or the release of argument, something quieter and considerably more permanent. I have processed paperwork my entire professional life, restructuring plans, operational frameworks, contractual instruments that determined how resources moved and who controlled them. I understood early in my career that a well-constructed document does things that a well-constructed conversation cannot. A conversation can be denied, reframed, remembered differently by different people in different rooms. A document sits exactly where you put it and says exactly what it said the day you filed it, regardless of what anyone decides to remember later. I spent 4 days working with my attorney and my financial advisor in parallel. The Florida mansion was restructured first. I incorporated a formal LLC with expanded asset protection provisions that placed the property beyond the reach of any future estate claim from any Caldwell-connected party. Inside that LLC, I established a charitable remainder trust tied to a healthcare access nonprofit I had been quietly incorporating for 3 months. The nonprofit was named after my mother, her full name, the name she carried her entire life while cleaning offices and raising a daughter she believed would go further than she had. The financial architecture was clean, permanent, and structurally unassailable. The asset Mirette had signed over as a calculated gesture was now legally and irrevocably mine in a form that no Caldwell attorney could approach from any direction. The second task was Gulliver Health Advisory. I formalized the Canadian incorporation with expanded intellectual property protections and restructured the succession provisions. The updated plan named Odette as a minority stakeholder, a percentage that would generate meaningful income for her without requiring her involvement in day-to-day operations. She did not know yet. I would tell her when the documentation was complete and the transfer was processed. I did not want her gratitude before it was real. The third task was the letter. My attorney drafted it to my precise specifications over 2 days. It was addressed to Mirette Caldwell personally. It documented everything I knew, everything I could prove, and the complete source trail of the 11 communications that formed the foundation of what I knew. Every date, every document, every contingency arrangement spelled out in language that left no interpretive space. The letter contained one request: a formal, legal, signed and notarized acknowledgement of Mirette's role in the arrangement, her selection of Raven, her coaching, her financial agreement, her orchestration of the networking event introduction. The acknowledgement would be held in my records as a correction of the factual record. It would not be filed publicly. It would not be submitted to any court. It would simply exist in my possession for as long as I determined it needed to. The letter also explained that if no acknowledgement was returned within 30 days, I reserved the right to provide the complete documentation package to the board of the Caldwell Family Charitable Foundation, of which Mirette had been a named trustee for over 20 years. Not the press, not a courtroom, the board, the people responsible for the stewardship of the institution she had spent decades helping build, the custodians of her legacy. I chose the foundation because Mirette Caldwell had spent her entire life constructing how she would be remembered. That was the only currency that had ever truly mattered to her. I was not taking her freedom. I was not taking her money. I was protecting the historical record and giving her the opportunity to clarify it herself. I called Idris that afternoon. 2 minutes. He asked if I was well. I told him I was. Then I told him that the answer to his question was yes. There had been happiness in the early years, before I understood what I was actually living inside. I told him I hoped he found his way through what was ahead. Then I said goodbye. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you." I did not know exactly what he was thanking me for. I did not ask. The letter was sent the following morning. 11 days later, a handwritten envelope arrived from Atlanta. I recognized the penmanship immediately, still controlled, still unmistakably Mirette. But the letters were smaller than they used to be. The line of the script slightly less certain. I opened it at my kitchen table. I read it once. Then I placed it in the file with everything else. Everything that could be documented had been documented. Everything that could be secured had been secured. The attorneys had done their work. The paperwork was filed, signed, and sitting exactly where I had placed it. There was one thing left. It did not belong to the attorneys or the documents or anyone who had helped me get here. It belonged to me alone, and it required me to be in a specific place to do it correctly. I booked a flight to Jacksonville. The mansion was between bookings, 4 days empty before the next tenant arrived. I had arranged it that way deliberately when I checked the rental calendar the morning after Mirette's envelope arrived. I did not examine that instinct too closely. I simply acted on it. I landed mid-morning and drove to the property alone. No calls, no music. The November coast came through the car window in the particular way Florida light arrives in that season. Low, clear, without the weight of summer behind it. I pulled through the gate and sat in the driveway for a moment before going inside. I walked through every room. The formal sitting room still had Mirette's furniture, heavy, considered, chosen to announce. I had kept it because it was well made and because I had not needed to change everything to make it mine. The guest rooms were as she had left them. The kitchen I had updated in the first year. New counters, different light fixtures, functional rather than declarative. The master bedroom had different furniture entirely. I had replaced everything in that room in month 3, not from bitterness. Because I sleep in spaces that belong to me, and that room needed to belong to me before anyone else could rent it. The study I had changed only once. On the wall above the desk, there was a photograph of my mother. Her full name was on the nonprofit documents filed in 3 states. She had cleaned offices for 31 years so that I could sit in them. The least I could do was put her name on something permanent. I went out through the back and sat on the dock. The water was still. The November air had a quality of quiet that I had not found anywhere else. Not in Toronto, not in Atlanta, nowhere. I sat there for 2 hours, without my phone, without a plan, without anything required of me. I let the stillness be exactly what it was. Then I took out my phone and called Mirette. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice came through carefully, composed in the way she had always been composed. But with the retrieval delay I now recognized, the slight gap between intention and execution that the dementia had opened in her. I spoke first. I told her what I knew, not as accusation, as inventory. I told her about the communications, the arrangement, the coaching, the contingency payment, the networking event guest list. I told her what I had documented and what I intended to do with it. I told her the acknowledgement she had returned in that handwritten envelope was in the file and would remain there. Then I listened. She spoke for 30 seconds. I did not interrupt. When she finished, told her that I forgave her. Not because what she had done was forgivable in any abstract sense, not because I was releasing her from the weight of it. The document in my file ensured she would carry the accountability regardless of what I said on this doc. I forgave her because I was finished carrying the weight of her choices inside my own body. That weight was hers. I was setting mine down. She did not respond immediately. The line was quiet. I said goodnight. I hung up. I sat on the dock until the light changed. Then I locked the house, drove to the airport, and boarded my flight back to Toronto. Langston was waiting at arrivals. He did not ask what I had done in Jacksonville. He took my bag and held my hand and drove us home through the Toronto night. I watched the city come into view through the window. It looked exactly like what it was. Mine. I told you at the beginning that this story was not what it appeared to be. I am going to show you now exactly what I meant. When people hear the beginning of this story, husband's mistress, twin pregnancy, mother-in-law's check, woman takes the money and leaves, they hear a particular kind of story. A woman displaced. A woman compensated for her displacement. A woman who accepted what was offered because accepting was all she could do. That is the story Atlanta told itself. That is the story everyone in that world believed they were watching. They were watching something else entirely. The divorce papers I signed without delay were not simply an exit. I understand that now, with the complete clarity of distance. They were the first document in a file I would spend 2 years completing. A file that now contains 11 communications between Mirette Caldwell and a woman she selected, coached, and paid to end my marriage. A guest list with a name placed on it deliberately. A photograph, taken 2 years before a supposedly accidental introduction. A notarized acknowledgement signed by the woman who wrote the $7 million check. Every document dated. Every document sourced. Every document sitting exactly where I put it. Gulliver Health Advisory signed its largest contract last month. A provincial health authority engagement that will occupy my team for the better part of 2 years, and has already generated 3 referral conversations. The firm I built from one desk and 2 clients in a country that did not know my name has become the thing I always knew it could become. Not because the circumstances were ideal, but because I was. The Florida Mansion LLC was formally transferred into the Charitable Remainder Trust 8 weeks ago. The Jacksonville property that Mirette signed over as a calculated instrument of management is now the primary asset funding a healthcare access nonprofit that serves uninsured women in Georgia and Ontario. My mother's name is on the letterhead. Her name is on the building signage at the first clinic we funded. She cleaned offices for 31 years. Her name is on something that will outlast everyone in this story. Idris is in Atlanta. He sold the Buckhead property 6 months ago and moved into something smaller in a different neighborhood. He is working. He is managing. He is a man rebuilding quietly in a city that has a long memory, and he knows it. The wedding deposits were never recovered. Several planned investments were liquidated during the unraveling that followed. None of it ruined him. That is not this story. But for the first time in his adult life, consequences arrived with invoices attached. I wish him no harm. I wish him the specific clarity that comes from consequence arriving at the right time. Whether it has, I cannot say. That is between him and the life he is living. The cruel irony is that Mirette's entire plan depended on one assumption: that the children would anchor Raven permanently inside the Caldwell family. The DNA results did more than expose a deception. They erased the foundation the arrangement had been built on. The grandchildren Mirette believed would secure her legacy were never part of that legacy at all. The mechanism she used to remove me became the mechanism that unraveled everything she had tried to construct. Raven settled. Her attorney negotiated a modest support arrangement that bore no resemblance to the estate access she had originally calculated. The twins' biological fathers were identified during the legal process, and the matter became considerably more complicated than the future she had planned around. She is in Atlanta still, I am told. Repositioned, as she always repositions. I have no further thoughts about Raven. She was a variable in someone else's plan who pursued her own agenda inside it. She did what she came to do with the resources available to her. The rest is her business. Mirette is in Augusta now. Her care is managed by people who know what they are doing. Her foundation board has a new chairperson. The Caldwell name is still on the letterhead. I hope the forgiveness I offered her from that Jacksonville dock found her somewhere she could receive it. I genuinely do. A woman who spent her entire life building something deserves to know at the end whether it meant what she believed it meant. I hope someone tells her clearly. I hope she can still hear it. On Sunday mornings, Langston's coffee cup sits next to mine on the kitchen counter. His jacket is on the chair by the door. These are facts. I offer them without announcement because they require none. This is simply what my life looks like now. The DNA test did not expose Raven. It did not collapse Idris's world. He had been building that collapse across 17 years with perfect dedication. What the DNA test changed was the last reason anyone in Atlanta had to avoid seeing clearly what had always been true: that the woman who left quietly was not the one who lost. That the check written to manage me had instead funded everything I needed to become immovable. That the file they never knew I was building was already complete before any of them understood a file existed. They managed me right out of a marriage I had already left and into a life I had already chosen. I signed every paper without delay. Not because I had no choice, because I had already made mine.